There are moments in life that arrive without warning. Moments that split everything you thought you knew into before and after. And sometimes those moments do not announce themselves with drama or noise. Sometimes they arrive as something small. A text message, sent to the wrong person, at 2:17 on a Tuesday afternoon. That was how it began for two women who had never met, who had no reason to ever meet, who were living completely separate lives in the same city, connected by one man who had made them both believe something that was never true. By the time Tuesday became Wednesday, both of their lives had changed forever. One of them was in a parking lot with a baseball bat. The other was 7 months pregnant, sitting in silence, holding a phone that had just told her everything. And somewhere across this country, in a federal building, a man with 2 stars on his uniform was already making calls. This is not a story about a car. It is a story about what happens when a lie gets too big to hold, and about what 3 women chose to do when it finally fell apart. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened on that Tuesday night in September, you need to go back further than the parking lot. You need to go back to the beginning of the lie, because this story did not start with a baseball bat. It started with a man named Darius Cole, who had a gift that many people never recognize as dangerous until it is too late. He was convincing, not in a loud or obvious way. In the quiet, patient way of someone who understands that the most effective deceptions are not the dramatic ones. They are the ones that feel entirely reasonable, the ones that come with explanations that make sense, the ones where everything the person tells you lines up perfectly with everything you can verify, because they have been careful to make sure it does. Darius Cole was 36 years old. He worked as a logistics coordinator for a private defense contractor near the Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base in Fort Worth, Texas. He had grown up in Atlanta, the son of Ghanaian immigrants who had worked hard to give him and his siblings opportunities they had not had. By any external measure, his life looked like a success. He made good money. He had a stable career. He was known by his colleagues as reliable, easy to work with, and socially effortless. The kind of man people liked without quite being able to articulate why. What those colleagues did not know, and what would take 14 months to fully surface, was that Darius Cole had been building something in the background of his life that was going to cost several people a great deal before it was finished. Amara Osei was 34 years old. She was the kind of woman who seemed, when you first met her, like someone who had figured out something most people were still working on. Not in an intimidating way. In the specific warmth of someone who has done the internal work and carries the results quietly. She had grown up in a military family. Her father, Colonel James Osei, had served for over 2 decades before retiring. Her mother, Patricia, had raised 3 children across 4 different states, in 4 different homes, with the particular resilience that military families develop when they understand that stability is something you build in people, not in places. Amara had absorbed all of it. She was organized, she was composed, she processed things before she reacted to them, and she had, from an early age, the specific quality of knowing who she was, regardless of what was happening around her. She had not followed her father or her older brother Raymond into the military. She had gone into education. She held a master's degree in curriculum development and worked as a senior instructional designer for a Fort Worth area school district, designing the kind of learning experiences that her mother had always believed were the foundation of everything else. She was good at it. She was respected. She had built a professional life that reflected who she genuinely was, and she had, 4 years before this story begins, met Darius Cole at a mutual friend's wedding in Atlanta. She had been cautious about him at first. Her mother, Patricia, had been more cautious. "He moves fast," Patricia had said to a friend later, but she was happy, happier than I had seen her in years. What do you say to that? What you say, as it turns out, is nothing, because the people we love are going to make their own choices, and the best we can do is be there when those choices reveal themselves. Amara and Darius married 2 years after they met. She was 32. The wedding was in Virginia Beach, near where she had grown up, near where her parents still lived. Her brother Raymond was there. Raymond, who was by then a major general in the United States Army. 2 stars. The Commandant General of a military training installation responsible for preparing over 40,000 active duty personnel every year. A man who had spent 22 years earning the authority his rank represented and who wore it with the specific quiet of someone who did not need to announce what he was. He gave a toast at the wedding that people who were there still remember. He said that his sister had always known who she was, and that what he hoped for her was a partner who saw that clearly and honored it completely. He raised his glass. He sat down. He watched his sister smile. He did not yet know what kind of man she had married. He would find out 14 months later. On a Wednesday morning, at 6 in the morning. When his phone rang and it was Amara, and her voice was controlled in the way it always was, and she told him everything. But we are not there yet. First, we need to talk about Priscilla. Priscilla Dent was 31 years old. She owned a hair salon in Fort Worth's near South Side neighborhood, a part of the city that had been developing for years and that had the particular energy of a place that was becoming something. She had opened the salon with savings she had accumulated over 6 years of working for other people. She had built her clientele one relationship at a time. She had hired 2 employees. She was, by any measure, a woman who understood what it meant to work for something and treat it with care. The people who knew her before the events of this story describe her consistently. She was generous. She was warm. She remembered the details of people's lives. She showed up when things were hard. She was the kind of friend who brought food without being asked and stayed without being invited and left only when she was certain you were okay. She was not, by any account of anyone who knew her, someone who belonged in a parking lot at 11:15 at night with a baseball bat, which makes what happened both more terrible and more understandable than it might otherwise appear. Because Priscilla Dent did not become the woman in that security camera footage because she was a violent person. She became that woman because someone had spent 14 months carefully and deliberately constructing a reality for her that was not real. And when that reality collapsed, the person inside it collapsed with it. She had met Darius 14 months before the Tuesday night, through a mutual friend at a birthday gathering. She had not been looking for anything serious. She had been, in her own words to a close friend, in a phase where she was focused on the business and not particularly interested in complications. Darius Cole had been a complication that arrived looking like a solution. He was attentive from the first conversation. Not in an overwhelming way, in the patient, consistent way that reads as security rather than urgency. He followed up. He remembered things she had said. He showed interest in her work, in her plans, in the specific texture of her daily life. Within the first month, he had told her that he was separated, that his marriage had ended in everything but paperwork, that he and his wife were living in the same house for logistical reasons while they worked out the details, but that there was nothing there anymore. Nothing had been there for a long time, and that he was simply waiting for the right moment to formalize what had already ended. Priscilla had asked him about it directly, more than once. She was not naive. She understood the risks. She had seen friends hurt by men who said things like what Darius was saying. She asked him to explain. He explained. He was calm. He was specific. He did not become defensive or evasive. He answered every question with the patient specificity of someone who understood that what she needed was not reassurance but evidence, and then, when words were not enough, he showed her documentation, emails that appeared to be from attorneys. A letter on what looked like legal letterhead. Not sophisticated forgeries, but detailed enough and delivered with enough calm authority that they served their purpose. They made the story feel official. They transformed a claim into something that appeared verifiable, and Priscilla believed him. Because the documentation was there. Because he was consistent. Because the things he told her matched the things she could check. And because she wanted to believe him, which is the most important part. Not because she was foolish, but because she was human, and humans extend trust to people who seem to have earned it. And Darius Cole understood this completely. 14 months passed. Darius Cole maintained 2 separate lives with a discipline that, in retrospect, is extraordinary in its commitment to deception. He was present for Priscilla in all the ways that mattered for sustaining belief. He called when he said he would. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered things. He was attentive. He described a future that was coming. Soon, he always said soon, in which the paperwork would be done and they would not have to manage the complications anymore. And at home, with Amara, he maintained a marriage that appeared from the outside to be functioning. Amara was building her career. She was busy. She was happy with her work. She was, during this period, doing what people who love their partners do. She was trusting him with the parts of their life she was not watching directly. She did not review the finances in detail because he managed them and had always managed them. She did not question his schedule in detail because he had always been consistent and reliable, and she had no reason to look closer. She was 7 months pregnant. She was planning for a child. She was living inside the version of their marriage that Darius had constructed for her, the one in which they were building something together. She did not know about Priscilla. She did not know about the woman in Dallas. She did not know about the secondary phone. She did not know about the fabricated documentation. She did not know that the man who came home to her every evening had been spending 14 months building a separate life in the hours he spent away from her. She was, in the most complete sense of the word, deceived, and she would remain deceived until 2:17 on a Tuesday afternoon, when a text message arrived on her phone that was not meant for her. The text was brief. It read, "Tonight won't work. A has a doctor's appointment. I have to take her. I'll make it up to you Thursday. Miss you." That was it. 11 words and an initial. Darius had been composing it on his secondary phone, the phone he used exclusively for his communication with Priscilla. He made a mistake that people who are managing too many things simultaneously sometimes make. He sent it from his primary phone instead, to his wife. The A in the message was Amara, her own initial, used by her husband in a text to another woman to explain why he could not see her that night, because he had to take his pregnant wife to a doctor's appointment. Amara received the message at 2:17 in the afternoon. She was at her desk at work. She read it. She set her phone face down on the desk. She sat for approximately 90 seconds. Then she picked up the phone and read it again. She did not call Darius. She did not text him. She did not call her mother. She did not call Raymond. She sat with what she had just read, and she allowed herself to understand it completely before she did anything at all. And then she went through his phone. She knew the passcode. He had given it to her 3 years earlier and had never changed it. In the photos application, in a folder with an innocuous label, she found images. A woman, with Darius, across what the date stamps indicated was 14 months. She went through all of them. She did not react visibly to any of them. She forwarded everything to her own email address. She went through the messages. She gathered names. She went through what else she could find. She forwarded everything that was relevant. She put his phone back exactly where she had found it. She finished her workday. She drove home. She made dinner. When Darius came home, she said nothing. She served the food. She listened to him talk about his day. She watched his face across the table and understood, with the specific clarity that comes after a long, contained shock, that she was looking at a stranger. Not because he had changed in that moment, because she had finally seen him clearly. After Darius left for work the following morning, she sat at her kitchen table and made a list. Everything she knew, everything she needed to find out, everything she needed to do. Then she called the best family law attorney in Fort Worth. At approximately the same time that Amara was going through the photographs on Tuesday afternoon, Priscilla Dent's phone received a message from a friend. It was a link to a local Fort Worth parenting blog, a post published 6 weeks earlier, celebrating an upcoming birth. The post was written by a woman who identified herself only by her first name, but the details were specific enough to place her precisely. The neighborhood, the school district job, the husband, referred to only as Darius. Priscilla clicked on the photograph embedded in the post. A woman, 7 months pregnant, smiling with the specific happiness of someone who is genuinely looking forward to what is coming. Her hands on her belly. And standing beside her, his arm around her, also smiling, Darius. Not looking like a man whose marriage was over in everything but paperwork, looking like a man who was expecting a child and was happy about it. Priscilla put down her phone. She picked it up again. She looked at the photograph again. She called Darius. He did not answer. She called again. He did not answer. She texted. He did not respond. She drove to the street where she knew he lived. His car was in the driveway. The lights in the house were on. She sat outside for 20 minutes, watching the house, thinking about 14 months, about the explanations, about the documentation, about the future he had described to her. Soon, always soon, that had apparently never existed. She drove home. She sat in her apartment alone. She did not sleep. She did not eat. She thought about what 14 months of her life had been worth. And at 11:15 that night, she made the worst decision of her life. She went to her storage closet. She picked up the baseball bat she kept for security purposes. She got in her car and she drove to the residential complex where, based on the information she had gathered about Darius and the vehicle she had seen in the blog post's photograph, she expected to find a white SUV. She found it. She parked. She got out of the car, and for 11 minutes she destroyed it. Every window, every panel, every surface she could reach. The car alarm screamed the entire time. She did not run. When she was finished, she stood beside what remained of the vehicle and looked at it. Then she got back in her car and drove away at a normal speed, as though she had completed something that needed to be completed. The security camera on the building across the parking lot had captured the entire 11 minutes, including her face, including her license plate. By the time she got back to her apartment, the Fort Worth Police Department already had both. The residential complex's security system fed to a monitoring company that flagged suspicious activity automatically. Building management was contacted within minutes of the incident. The police were called, and by midnight, a property crimes detective had reviewed the footage and logged a case number. The standard process from that point would have been routine. A detective would be assigned. A warrant for the plate would be filed. The registered owner of the plate would be contacted within a day or two. Charges would be pursued through the standard timeline. That was the standard process. What happened instead was not standard. Because at 5:58 the following morning, Amara Osei's phone rang. It was the Fort Worth Police Department calling to inform her that her vehicle had been damaged. She thanked them. She ended the call, and then she made a different call, one that would change the timeline of everything that followed. Raymond Osei answered on the second ring. He was always awake at this hour. 22 years of military service had reorganized his relationship with sleep in permanent ways. His sister told him everything: the text message, the photographs, the 14 months, the car, the police, 7 months pregnant. She said all of it in the specific calm of someone who has spent the night processing and has arrived by morning at the far side of the shock. Raymond listened, without interrupting. When she finished, he asked one question. "Are you safe?" She said yes. He said, "Then I'll handle the rest." He meant exactly what he said. Within the next 2 hours, Raymond Osei made a series of phone calls. He has been consistently direct when asked about what those calls were and who they were to. He made calls to people he knew, people with the standing and the access to ensure that the right attention was applied to the right situation with the right urgency. At 7:14 that morning, the Fort Worth Police Department received a call from a number registered to a federal government communications line. The caller identified himself by name and rank and asked to speak with the watch commander. He was connected immediately. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. By 9 that morning, the property crime case had been reassigned and elevated. By 10, it had been elevated again. And Detective Layla Washington, 14 years on the Fort Worth force and one of the most experienced domestic case investigators in the department, was assigned as lead. Detective Washington reviewed the footage. She reviewed the plate records. She reviewed the information that had already been gathered. And she noted in the account she would later give that this case had arrived at her desk with an unusual degree of institutional attention. Resources that would normally take days to arrange were available within hours. Information that would typically require additional paperwork arrived cleanly. She did not ask why. She had enough experience to understand when she was being pointed towards something that mattered. She began where investigations always begin, with the person on the footage. Priscilla Dent was brought in for questioning Wednesday morning. She came voluntarily. She came with an attorney. She did not deny being in the parking lot. The footage made denial pointless. She did not deny what she had done. What she did was explain it. For 2 hours, she sat in that interview room and told Detective Washington the full story. Darius, the 14 months, the separated story, the documentation, the message from her friend, the photograph, sitting outside his house, the drive back to her apartment, the 4 hours, the decision. She was not presenting a legal defense. She was not trying to minimize what she had done. She was trying to make someone understand how a person who was not, by nature or history, a violent person had ended up in a parking lot at 11:15 at night, causing $23,000 of damage to a stranger's car. Detective Washington listened to all of it. She asked clarifying questions. She took careful notes. And when the interview was over and Priscilla had been formally charged with felony criminal mischief under Texas law and released on bond, Detective Washington sat with her notes and paid particular attention to one detail that Priscilla had mentioned almost in passing. Darius had shown her documentation. Early in their relationship, papers that had made the separated story feel verifiable, official, real. Detective Washington wrote that detail down, and then she started pulling on it. What Detective Washington found when she began pulling on that thread was not what she had expected to find. The documentation Priscilla had been shown, the emails, the letter on apparent legal letterhead, had not come from any attorney's office. They were not connected to any actual legal proceeding. Because there had been no legal proceeding. There had been no separation filing. There had been no attorney communication of any kind related to a divorce between Darius Cole and Amara Osei. The documentation Priscilla had been shown was fabricated, created to look official, designed to make a lie feel true. This was not, in the eyes of the law, a minor additional detail. Fabricating legal documentation to deceive someone into a romantic relationship and, as would become apparent, to extract financial benefit from that relationship, crossed lines that property crime cases do not typically cross. Detective Washington elevated her findings. And as she continued working through the financial records associated with the case, she found something else that elevated the situation further still. There was a third woman. She is not named in this account at her own request. She lived in Dallas. She was 33 years old. She had met Darius approximately 8 months before the Tuesday night at an industry event they had both attended for work. He had told her the same story he had told Priscilla. Separated. Marriage over in everything but paperwork, just waiting for the right time to finalize things. He had shown her similar documentation. She had also believed him, and she had, over the course of 8 months, lent him money, $12,000, described by Darius as needed for legal fees related to the divorce proceedings that did not exist. The $12,000 had not been repaid. When Detective Washington contacted her as part of the investigation, she provided records, bank transfers, text messages in which Darius had requested the money and explained why he needed it, text messages in which he had reassured her that the divorce was almost finalized and that everything would be settled soon. She had been waiting for soon. She was still waiting. The civil suit she would eventually file against Darius Cole to recover her money would take over a year to resolve, and collecting on the judgment would prove difficult in the ways that judgments against people who have restructured their lives around avoiding consequences are always difficult. But we are getting ahead of the story, because before any of that happened, there was one more thing that Detective Washington found in the financial records, something that changed the nature of the case entirely. Darius Cole held a security clearance, not a high-level clearance, but a clearance. One that required annual reviews that included financial background checks. In the United States military and defense contracting environment, financial integrity is not a background concern. It is a central one. A person who holds a clearance and who has, in the background of their life, significant hidden debt accumulated through multiple undisclosed relationships, through fraudulent borrowing, through the specific financial obligations of maintaining 2 separate lives on one salary, is a person whose vulnerability to coercion or compromise is considered an active risk. The agencies responsible for clearance reviews do not approach this philosophically. They approach it practically. A person with secrets can be leveraged. A person with hidden financial obligations may, under the right pressure, make choices that put sensitive information at risk. This is not a theoretical concern. It is the reason clearance reviews exist. Detective Washington's findings were shared with the appropriate parties, through channels that she described only as the ones that were available to her. The referral that initiated an expedited security clearance review for Darius Cole came from a contact whose identity Raymond Osei has declined to provide publicly, saying only, "Someone I knew, someone who understood what I was asking and why." Someone who knew that what I was describing was exactly the kind of situation clearance reviews exist for. The review was not slow. It was not routine. It was conducted with the urgency that Raymond's position and connections could generate, which was considerable. The review began on Thursday. It concluded 11 days later. And at the end of those 11 days, Darius Cole's security clearance was suspended pending further investigation. He received the notification by phone on a Monday morning. He also received, simultaneously, the notification that his position at the defense contractor had been placed on administrative hold pending the outcome of the clearance review. He was sitting in his car in the parking lot of his attorney's office when both notifications arrived. The people who knew Darius Cole were asked later, in various conversations and accounts, what they believed had affected him most during this period. Not the criminal exposure, not the financial consequences, not even the collapse of the multiple relationships he had been maintaining. What affected him most, according to those who spoke with him or observed him in that period, was the specific knowledge that the clearance review had not come through routine channels, that someone had made a call, someone with the standing and the access to ensure that the right agencies looked at the right situation with the right urgency. Someone connected enough for that urgency to travel quickly and arrive completely. Someone whose sister's car had been destroyed on a Tuesday night in a Fort Worth parking lot. He had spent 14 months lying to 3 women. He had not spent a single moment considering what would happen when one of them turned out to have a 2-star major general for a brother. That omission was going to cost him more than he had imagined it was possible to lose. The criminal case against Priscilla Dent was assigned to the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office. It proceeded on the standard timeline for felony criminal mischief under Texas law. The assessed damage to the vehicle came to $23,400. The charge carried the potential for a felony conviction, significant fines, and prison time. Priscilla's attorney, a Fort Worth defense lawyer named Calvin Marsh, who had spent 15 years working criminal defense cases in the region, built her defense around one central argument: not that she was innocent of the act. The security footage made that argument unavailable. His argument was about the circumstances that had produced the act, the fabricated documentation, the deliberate and sustained deception, the specific manipulation of a woman's trust over 14 months, the emotional and psychological impact of discovering in a single afternoon that the relationship she had believed in was built on nothing real. He was not arguing that the damage to the SUV was acceptable. He was arguing that the jury deserved to understand the full picture of how a woman who was not violent by nature had arrived at a moment of violence. The prosecution acknowledged the circumstances. They did not find them legally exculpatory. The law on criminal mischief in Texas does not provide a defense based on the victim's spouse's behavior. The damage was real. The intent was deliberate. The law was the law. The case moved toward trial. And then, 6 weeks before the scheduled trial date, something arrived that changed the trajectory of everything. It was a document, 3 pages, submitted by Amara Osei to the court, a victim impact statement. In cases involving property crime, victim impact statements are not unusual. They describe the harm. They articulate the effect of the crime on the victim's life. They are typically used to inform the sentencing process. Amara Osei's statement did all of those things. It described precisely and without minimizing the financial cost of the destroyed vehicle. It described the experience of being 7 months pregnant and learning that a stranger had destroyed her car because her husband had been lying to that stranger about the nature of their marriage for over a year. It described the psychological reality of processing betrayal at multiple levels simultaneously. The betrayal of the husband who had deceived her, and the more complicated reality of a woman she had never met who had acted from pain that Amara, upon reflection, had been able to recognize. And then the statement did something that nobody in the district attorney's office had seen coming. Amara Osei wrote that she did not believe that prison would serve justice in this case. She wrote that Priscilla Dent had also been a victim of the same deception that had victimized her. She wrote that the destruction of her vehicle had been directed at the wrong target. She wrote that the person most responsible for everything that had happened was not the woman who had held the bat. He was the man who had handed both of them reasons to be in that parking lot. And she wrote, clearly without ambiguity, that she would not oppose a negotiated resolution that included restitution, community service, and a period of supervised probation. She wrote that her preference was for the legal system to apply its attention to the person whose fabrications had made all of this possible. When Calvin Marsh read the statement, he sat with it for a long time. He had spent 15 years in criminal defense. He had seen a great many things. He had not seen this. He called Priscilla and read it to her over the phone. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Priscilla said, "Why would she do that?" Marsh said he did not know, but he thought it was worth finding out. He reached out to the district attorney's office and proposed a meeting. A conversation between Priscilla and Amara, with both attorneys present, in a neutral location, to allow both women to speak directly if they chose to. The district attorney's office consulted with Amara. Amara agreed to the meeting. It took place in a conference room in a downtown Fort Worth office building on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the originally scheduled trial date. Both attorneys were present. A mediator was present. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Neither woman has disclosed in detail what was said in that room. What has been reported, from the mediator's notes, from the attorney's subsequent accounts, and from what Amara has said briefly in the one public statement she has made about this period, is this. Amara spoke first. She told Priscilla about the text message that had been sent to the wrong phone. She told her what she had found on Darius's phone. She told her about the third woman in Dallas. She told her about the fabricated documentation, that the legal paperwork Priscilla had been shown was not real, that there had been no attorney, no filing, no actual divorce proceeding. She told her about the $12,000 that the woman in Dallas had lent Darius and had never been repaid. She gave Priscilla the full picture, the picture she had assembled across the weeks since Tuesday afternoon. And then she said something that the mediator later described, in the carefully worded professional summary she filed, as the most significant moment of the meeting. Amara said, "You destroyed my car. That was wrong. I know why you did it. I also know that we were both lied to by the same person, and I am not going to let him cost me my compassion on top of everything else he has already cost me." The district attorney's office accepted the framework that Amara had proposed. Priscilla Dent entered a no-contest plea to a reduced misdemeanor charge. She was sentenced to 2 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution of the $23,400 in damage, paid in structured installments over 18 months. She did not go to prison. She did not receive a felony conviction. She kept her salon. She kept her employees. She kept the professional life she had built. The sentence, when it became public, generated the kind of divided response that complicated outcomes always generate. There were people who felt that any act of deliberate property destruction deserved a harsher consequence, regardless of the circumstances that produced it. There were people who felt that the sentence was exactly proportionate, given that the circumstances were material and the victim herself had argued for it. And there were people, a significant number of them, who focused not on the sentence at all, but on the statement, on what Amara Ose had chosen to write, and on what it said about who she was and what she had decided mattered more than revenge. Calvin Marsh, when asked to comment on the outcome by a local reporter, said simply, "The victim showed more grace than most people in that position would have been capable of. My client knows that. She will carry it for the rest of her life." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. What happened to Darius Cole unfolded not as a single dramatic consequence, but as a series of them, arriving over months, each one building on the last. His security clearance was permanently revoked 8 months after the initial suspension. The investigation into the fabricated documentation was referred to federal authorities. He was named as the defendant in a civil suit filed by the woman in Dallas, who had been patient for over a year before concluding that patient was no longer serving her. The civil judgment was entered against him. Collecting on it proved as difficult as it usually does when someone has reorganized their financial life around minimizing what can be found. His position at the defense contractor was not reinstated. Finding equivalent employment in the defense contracting sector without a clearance was, as he discovered, effectively impossible. That was a significant part of the architecture of his professional life that he had not considered when he was constructing his personal one. He relocated from Fort Worth. The details of where he went are not part of the public record. The people who knew him in this period describe someone who appeared, for the first time in their acquaintance with him, genuinely at a loss. A man who had been so skilled at constructing realities for other people that he had somehow failed to fully account for the reality that was being constructed for him. One transaction at a time, one consequence at a time, by people who were considerably less willing to overlook details than he had been counting on. The divorce was initiated by Amara 3 weeks after the Tuesday night. It was finalized before their son was born. The process was not dramatic. Amara had assembled the information she needed before she made her first move, and the information was comprehensive. There were no prolonged disputes. There were simply facts and consequences and a legal process that moved through them efficiently. Their son was born in November. He arrived healthy and on time. 5 weeks after the plea agreement was accepted and the legal proceedings against Priscilla were formally concluded. Amara named him James Raymond Osei, after her father, the retired colonel who had given her the specific inheritance of knowing that integrity is a practice, not a trait, and after her brother Raymond, who had answered his phone on a Wednesday morning at 6 and said, "I'll handle the rest," and had meant exactly that. Raymond Osei was present at the birth. He took emergency leave from his installation. He drove 4 hours from where he was stationed. He was in the waiting room when his nephew arrived. He was the second person, after the delivery nurse, to hold him. He has not spoken at length publicly about that day. The one account that exists comes from Amara, who said simply, "He cried. My brother, who I have never seen cry about anything in 20 years, stood in that hospital room and cried. And then he sat down and held James, and did not say a word for a long time. And I understood that this was what the whole thing had been about from the beginning. Not the car, not the security clearance, not any of the rest of it. This moment, this boy, this was what all of it had been in service of." Raymond Osei has been asked, in various contexts since these events became known, whether he has any regrets about how he responded to his sister's call. He has given essentially the same answer every time. He says, "My sister called me and told me she was 7 months pregnant and had been deceived for over a year by someone she had trusted completely, and that a woman who had also been deceived by that same person had destroyed her car in a parking lot the night before. I made phone calls. I asked questions. I made sure that the right people were looking at the right things with the appropriate level of attention. Whether that constitutes using my position to influence events depends on how you define influence. I would define it as doing what family is for." He was asked in one interview whether he had felt any sympathy for Priscilla. He was quiet for a moment before answering. Then he said, "She destroyed my sister's car while my sister was 7 months pregnant. I'm not going to pretend that did not matter to me or that my first instinct was anything other than anger. But I also listened to everything Amara told me about what that woman had been told, about what she had been shown, about what she had believed for 14 months. And I am a person who has spent 22 years in an institution that understands, better than most, that the person holding the weapon is not always the person who created the conditions for the weapon to be used. Amara's statement said what needed to be said. I was proud of her for saying it." He was asked one final question, whether he believed justice had been served. He said, "The man who created these conditions lost his clearance, his career, his marriage, and the respect of everyone who knew him. The woman who destroyed the car received a proportionate consequence and was given the chance to rebuild. My sister's son was born healthy. I think justice is rarely a single moment. It is usually a series of outcomes that arrive over time. And if I look at the full picture of what has happened since that Tuesday night, I think the outcomes align reasonably well with what each person had coming. Yes, I think justice was served." Priscilla Dent completed her community service hours over the course of 8 months. She still runs her salon in near Southside Fort Worth. She has not spoken publicly about the events described in this account. The people who know her describe someone who has changed, not broken, but different in the way that people are different when they have looked directly at something they are not proud of and made a decision to become something better than what they saw in that moment. She has not attempted to contact Amara. Amara has not contacted her. What was said in that conference room was its own conclusion. It did not require anything further. Amara Osei is raising James in Fort Worth. She returned to her work in curriculum development 8 months after giving birth. She has made one brief public statement about the events in a written piece she shared with a small online publication that covers women's advocacy issues. In it, she wrote, "I was angry at everyone for a long time, at him, at her, at myself for not seeing things I should have seen sooner, and somewhere in the middle of all of that anger, I had to make a decision about what I was going to do with it. I could hold on to it. I could let it shape what I became after this. Or I could put it somewhere and move forward without it. I chose to put it somewhere. Not because what happened to me was acceptable. It was not. Not because what she did was acceptable. It was not. But because the only person I was responsible for shaping was the one growing inside me, and I wanted James to be raised by a woman who knew that grace and strength were not opposites, that you could have been wronged and still choose not to let the wrongdoing define your response. I don't know if I made the right choice. I know I made the choice that felt true to who I am. And I think that is the only standard that was ever really available to me. There is a question that sits at the end of this story, not about guilt or innocence or whether the legal outcomes were appropriate. Those questions have been answered more or less in the way that such questions get answered, imperfectly, through a process that does its best with the information available. The question that remains is the one this story keeps returning to. How did it go on as long as it did? How does a man maintain this level of sustained deception across 3 relationships, across 14 months, with fabricated documentation and secondary phones and borrowed money and constructed futures, without being caught sooner? The answer, as uncomfortable as it is that he was not caught sooner because the people around him had no reason to look. They trusted him because he had given them specific, carefully designed reasons to trust him. He had studied what each woman needed in order to believe, and he had provided it, not sloppily, not carelessly, with the specific precision of someone who understood that sustained deception requires maintenance and that the maintenance requires knowing your audience. This is not a compliment. It is an observation about how deception works. About why intelligent, careful, thoughtful people who would describe themselves as skeptical, as not easily fooled, still find themselves inside a lie they did not know they were inside. The red flags were there. In retrospect, every person close to this situation can identify them. The secondary phone, the documentation that was always described as almost resolved, just a few more weeks, the future that kept being just around the corner, the specific, too perfect reasonableness of every explanation. But red flags are only visible in retrospect if you did not know you were supposed to be looking. And the most effective liars understand this. They create environments in which the looking does not occur, in which trust, once extended, is reinforced just enough to prevent examination, in which the lie is never so fragile that a single question would collapse it. Darius Cole was, at the enterprise of deception, genuinely skilled. The cost of that skill was paid by 3 women, 1 child, and 1 man whose career and reputation were built on an integrity he did not possess. That is not a lesson. It is a consequence. And consequences, as this story demonstrates, have a way of arriving completely regardless of how carefully you have planned for them not to. Raymond Osei's nephew James is learning to walk. Amara posts photographs occasionally, nothing that identifies her location or discloses more than she chooses to share. In them, James looks like himself, like a person becoming, with his mother's calm and his own specific energy that is entirely his own. Amara looks, in the photographs, like a woman who has done something difficult and has arrived on the other side of it still recognizably herself, which is perhaps the most any of us can hope for when something we did not choose arrives and demands that we choose how to respond to it. She chose grace. She chose to move forward. She chose her son. And in doing so, she demonstrated something that this story would not have demonstrated without her. that the most powerful response to being wronged is not always the loudest one. It is not always the most aggressive one. Sometimes it is the one that costs you the most to make, the one that requires you to see someone else's pain clearly, at the moment when your own pain is the most immediate thing in your world, and to decide that both things are real and that both of them deserve to be held. That is not a small thing. It is, in fact, an extraordinary thing. And it is the thing that this story will be remembered for by the people who were close to it, long after the details of the parking lot and the security clearance and the fabricated documentation have faded. Not what was destroyed, but what was chosen, in the middle of all of it, by a woman who had every reason to choose differently. That is the story. That is where it ends. With a woman and her son, and a decision she made about who she was going to be. And with the knowledge that the people who tried to make her into something smaller had, in the end, only helped her become more completely herself.